This manhwa starts with the young angelic-looking girl. This girl's beautiful, naive, but she's also living a lie. This model begins with a young girl who is actually impersonating the role of a noble woman. She's under the leadership of Countess, and she must be perfect at the age of marriage. The distance. For a long time, thinking about her life and her future, our heroine was admiring the arrival of spring. Her heart was very sad because the husband had no business with the fact that she was experiencing the loss of a loved one and was at risk of becoming homeless. But then I decided that she was complaining in vain and mentally turned to her grandfather, left her with the following words: that maybe everything is for the best in the world will still remain beautiful regardless of human actions. Although all the same, again and again, being in despair, our heroine came to the idea that reality is very cruel and she has no choice but to protect her house and grandmother herself. The thoughts of the upset Arnor were disturbed by the screams of them. A persistently called her to get down to the dining table. The girl, without leaving the room, shouted back that she would come soon, and jumped off the chair to first calm down a little and get herself in order. When Anna went to the mirror and saw herself, she was horrified because her whole face betrayed her inner feelings and therefore in every way masking her despair. She tried to convince herself that everything would be fine and the solution would always be found. Having calmed down a little, the girl decided that the letter must be hidden deeper in the table, which she did. And after that, our heroine went to the dining room. The lunch was held together with the grandmother, who immediately asked if they had met with the lawyer, to which the girl hesitantly gave a positive answer and then hesitated. In the end, Anna admitted to her grandmother that their meeting had not yet taken place, but also added that she would definitely meet with a legal expert this week. The grandmother asked her granddaughter to try to fulfill her word in order to finally find a way out of this situation, to which our heroine asked her not to worry, although in fact she had already met with a lawyer and found out that this house belongs to Baron Bannon, who died a month ago. During the meeting, the lawyers stated that according to inheritance law, the property should pass only to a male person. And since there are no more males in the Batten family, their house will be inherited by Baron Thomas. Nephew Anna asked her husband if there was a possibility that she and her grandmother would still be able to live in their house as before, but she was told that it was unlikely and that the lawyer advised her to contact a relative in person. Our heroine understood that she would have to ask. She needed to rest for a while. Our heroine went to the garden and sat down in the place where her grandfather liked to sit and wept from resentment, although she consoled herself with the fact that that man was not even worthy of her. Tears are not thought about the fact that she had been cornered, even though she had a father, and at that moment it seemed to her that after all there had been some enlightenment in her hopeless situation. Clear the palace. The young men were practicing rowing and the clatter of their oars against the water and the loud alternation of teams resounded throughout the district. The young man, who was still resting in his room, woke up to the shouts of the athletes and even tried to silence their commands for some time. He had no choice but to get out of bed, and he did so, calling the boys full of energy jerks. The prince, displeased Li, concluded that the spring was to blame for everything, which made everything around become unbearably loud. The heir went to the window and watched how the sons of noble families who dream of the opportunity to do at least something worthwhile in life sit close to each other in boats and use their oars senselessly. And at the same time he did not understand why they could not switch their energy to girls. The prince dressed and called the butler, who immediately arrived at his first call and immediately learned the reason for the call because Pierre simply asked him to look out of the window and he himself pointed to the swimmers. Devoitsky immediately apologized and then explained that after permission from the city hall, they could not do anything about it. The man also said that this year the number of training teams has increased. So there has been more noise. The prince looked at their futile attempts to break into the leaders and considered them fools, because he knew that in any case the victory would go to Lean and Easter. The butler offered to move his things to another room, but the prince refused and asked to bring him fruit on the balcony. His breakfast and Pierre himself in the meantime went to take a bath. But even it did not relax him and he sat immersed in his thoughts, which were interrupted by the loud training that was happening outside. Nothing changed at breakfast either. Only at one point Pierre was disturbed by a butler who informed him that the crown prince had visited him. He did not even have time to answer anything as the young heir boldly entered the room and was already heading towards him. On the balcony, Pierre greeted Leonid and immediately asked what made him come in such a hurry that he didn't even have enough time to change his tracks. The man directly asked the question what had happened, which caused both surprise and dissatisfaction in the morning visitor leaning through a newspaper on the table where the front page featured a picture of Pierre and boasted the inscription crown-bearing poisonous mushroom. After which the question, "Is everything going to be all right?" followed. Pierre was intrigued by his new nickname, which Leonid also noticed, and asked if he knew about it. He responded to all of this by approving the choice of photo, which he found to be good, and even thanked the editor in absentia for it, before asking about the rumors regarding the return of Princess Gladys from Risen. Previously this girl was loved by the whole kingdom, but now she was considered a princess loser who survived the separation from Prince Pierre and also lost the child. But the return of Gladys to rise in all curious eyes were once again turned towards the prince, now nicknamed the poisonous mushroom and the unfortunate princess. And the main question is whether they won't appeal to the aristocrats and confirmed that today was perfect weather for the growth of poisonous mushrooms, much to the confusion of the second prince, but the first only added that they were growing well. Meanwhile, our heroine was at the station and now thinking she was standing on the platform waiting for her train, she was distracted and even frightened by the appeal of the station employee. Loudly asked if she was going to get on the train, to which the girl gave a positive answer. Anna stood their side and thought that just at this time her grandmother should have found her letter and read it. So now she was mentally apologizing for leaving without even saying goodbye. On the other hand, the heroine could not say that she wanted to meet her father because she knew that it would be better for her grandmother to go bankrupt than to ask for help. Her son-in-law, whom she did not want to know the girl, was driving to meet her father, to meet him for the first time after her mother's funeral, while 11 years had passed since the day, or to grip the handle of the suitcase anxiously and reason that they were no different from the others, even if they weren't as close to their father as they should or could be at the moment. Our heroine did not even know if her father would even let her on the threshold. But this was her last hope, so there was no turning back. Despite all her determination or to continue to doubt herself and whether she would be able to do it. So she was afraid to take the next step. But at that moment the station employee again scared our heroine with a shout and this time displeased. Lee remarked that if she was not going to get into the car, then she should not disturb others. Also, with the words that she should take fate into her own hands, the girl took a step forward, especially since no one cared about her troubles to concluded for herself that she must face fate face to face and withstand any opposition. Our heroine drove with the thought that if she was destined to cling to tiny sparks of hope, then so be, although the degree of her excitement exceeded the scale. Because the girl was afraid that her father would simply kick her out and she would have nowhere else to go. And Pierre was waiting for the next morning meeting, during which the disaffected young woman tried in every way to attract the attention of the man, where his indifference annoyed her, although at the same time she mentally acknowledged how wonderful he looked even in this state. And the prince just wanted to sleep. Because he returned home almost before dawn and fell asleep in the morning, the girl became increasingly angry and tried to get answers to her questions. Especially, she wanted to know that everything written in the newspaper was just fiction. But the prince remained silent, and yet the princess did not back down and tried to get answers to the questions that worried her while barely restraining. Her anger here did not comment on what was written in the newspaper, but simply thought that his visitor was an amazing girl because it was not even day yet and she had already rushed from the capital. And even with full parade, the interlocutor handed the newspaper to the prince where he saw an article that said that, according to an anonymous source close to the royal family, they had learned that the relationship between the prince and his ex-fiancée was very unusual. Pierre also read that the authors discussed the young man's outrageous behavior towards the princess, who forgave him because she had always been generous. Friends also learned from the newspaper that there was every reason to believe that this summer the entire reason secular society would be filled with hardened intrigues, after which the prince simply threw the blank newspaper on the table. He continued to be silent and drink his tea. But this annoyed the girl even more, and after waiting a little, she still demanded an explanation. Since Pierre absolutely did not try to calm down his visitor or understand her, the girl said that in this case their relationship had come to an end. The young woman now confidently stated that she did not think it necessary to continue their relationship any longer, explaining that it did not make sense, and then added hopefully that by the end of spring she would be able to announce her engagement to another. To this the prince reacted just as indifferently and remarked about himself that it was not bad and even comfortable with her until the gossip about him spread everywhere, and the girl meanwhile tried to understand. His silence suddenly pierced on the guest with a statement that he congratulated her on a quick engagement, which caused an explosion of indignation from his interlocutor. The girl demanded an explanation of how he dared to say such a thing to her, to which Pierre innocently declared that she was the first to propose a divorce. So he does not find anything wrong with her words. Prince explained that he had only accepted her offer and now did not understand what was wrong, what had managed his interlocutor. The girl tried to get at least some explanation or an attempt to keep her with the prince had already decided everything for himself, and he began to think that the morning visitor was too annoying. Meanwhile, as the guest was overflowing with anger and receiving no answers to her questions, the prince expressed his hope that she would be a great match for Sommel and took leave of her. When Pierre went to another room, Mrs. Fitz, from whom he hoped to hear a lullaby because he really wanted to sleep, the woman was ready to fulfill his every wish. But this time she brought him bad news. Mrs. Fitz informed the prince that he needed to go to the train station as soon as possible because the queen would be arriving soon. Pierre completely forgot that she was coming back today. Then the woman also reminded that today there will be a charity reception at the Royal Hospital where she was invited. Mrs. Fitz very untimely comforted the prince with the fact that it was he who would have to become the queen's attendant and it was time for him to get ready. Meanwhile, our heroine was traveling in a train where she was so crushed by a whole crowd of people that she had no opportunity to breathe in and out calmly. Anna looked at how crowded it was outside the window, and although this was the city in which she was born and grew up, despite the fact that she had to leave here at the age of 5, finally the station attendant announced that the train had arrived at its final stop. So now it was time to pull myself together and go forward. But here too, our heroine was awaited by such a column of people that she saw nothing, no one, and simply got lost among them, not understanding what was happening at all, or to assume that something happened. People continued to crowd and look at someone, while the girl could not get through this crowd and get out of it, getting further and further away from the exit. The new mistress of the house continued to ask the husband what he was going to do with her, and the husband asked not to worry because he intended to send her home immediately. However, the woman did not think that On would just take it and leave. Especially after appearing in the middle of the night and making her demands so untimely when they were already one step away from bankruptcy, the father was determined to send his daughter home. Considering that all these years there was no news from her except now to appear before him and beg for money. The man opened the door to the room with all his determination and was about to express his decision. But Anta confused him with her calm greeting. Her father's face just changed before his eyes, and even his wife could not understand what was happening to him. While he appreciated her thin frame and neat features the same as her beautiful mother, the man now reflected on the fact that since she was naturally endowed with such an appearance, the girl should be pampered a little and she would become even more beautiful. And perhaps she could be compared with the general favorite, Princess Gladius. Our heroine's father had a selfish plan, and now he has already changed his decision, inviting his daughter to the table and asked his wife to leave and talk about what literally depends on the fate of their family. In the morning, the prince returned home and first of all, greeted Mrs. Fitz. The woman immediately said that his return was much sooner than they expected, to which the young man laughed. The housekeeper immediately reported that he had received an invitation from the palace, and this interested the prince so much that he even asked why he was being called. Mrs. Fitz informed Pierre that the Queen ordered him to take a direct part in the celebration on the occasion of the day of the foundation of the kingdom, and added that there was an addendum to the invitation where, in case of refusal to carry out the order, all responsibility fell on the servants of the prince. The young man concluded that this invitation was more like a threat, but the woman could not do anything about it. Every year in May, the day of the foundation of the kingdom was celebrated, and the opening of the festive season was a ball in the royal palace, where the whole worldly bowmen gathered. But Prince never appeared at this event after his abdication, and now everything said that his absence will not be ignored. Now, as before, the young man recalled a charity evening where the Queen asked him if there was a lady who touched his heart. Then her son tried to express a negative answer in a gentle way, but apparently the mother's anxiety reached the extreme point. She did not believe him to the end. The prince connected all this with the break that had happened between him and Gladys, and now be that as it may, but this whole situation annoyed him to the point of fear. Gear undressed and lay down on his bed, sighing loudly at the fact that all these problems had fallen on him, and were now haunting him, and our heroine noticed that there is a strange atmosphere in her father's house, and everything around seems gloomy. Besides, for 3 days there have been talks about the fact that he needs time to think things over, and the girl deciding that if this continues and further, then she will return home with nothing. All his thoughts were interrupted by a maid who brought her afternoon tea. The girl immediately and again was indignant that the young lady addressed her formally, and asked not to do so again. When Lisa heard from Awata that this would not happen again, she kindly asked for an informal appeal. Once again smiling, our heroine thought about the fact that she was treated so well by her peers. Even when she met Pave, the girl immediately remembered her friend, who was the only one in battle because there were few children in that place due to its remoteness. Anna missed him now because he had gone to university and left Belford a long time ago, and they hadn't seen each other since then, and she suddenly thought that the Royal Academy of Arts, where he was studying, must be located in this very town. Our heroine turned to Lisa for help and asked how far the educational institution was located from their house and found out that it was 5 stops away on the stagecoach. Now she became interested in what Payable had become and how he had changed, and the girl was completely immersed in our thoughts. The girl was distracted by a message that her father was waiting for her, who suspiciously called her his beautiful daughter. With a charming smile, Anna also heard the question of whether she could ever forgive her neglectful father who had never been able to visit her once while she was growing up and turned into such a beautiful girl, and wondered how he could atone for his inordinate guilt towards her. Continuing to talk, the father finally gave his decision about the estate which he intended to transfer to her order. Couldn't believe her ears, but the man repeated that he was going to buy it back from Thomas Batten and put it under her control. Our heroine did not know how to thank her father and still could not believe it. Questioning whether it was true, only now one nuance appeared, or rather a request from the father's side which Aunt had to fulfill. From his side, the man asked his daughter to stay with them and live in this house for only 1 year as a real family, which our heroine definitely did not expect. The father argued that he did not want to leave his daughter alone somewhere far away. And here she would be able to make good connections, especially since Brenda volunteered to help, to which the woman said that our heroine is after all the daughter of an aristocrat. The girl thought about what she should do because there was an opportunity to enter secular society, which she did not even dare to think about, and on the other hand, if she refused, her estate would definitely be taken away. Anna looked at her father again, and he seemed very sincere and even willing to help. And after weighing everything carefully, our heroine decided that this offer was not bad, so she agreed to stay in her father's house. The companions, led by the prince, sat, drank and discussed the past races where once again the horse Piro won. The men suggested that the prince sell his horse and allow others to win, claiming that he did not care about the competition. But the young man firmly stated that despite the fact that he is not particularly interested in this whole racing process, he is not going to sell his horse. In the midst of all this conversation came the subject of the fact that Viscount Hardy, according to the latest rumors, had the other day installed another pretty maid in his house. The prince thought it inadvisable to make such an expense in his position and suggested that perhaps the girl had been there before. Although Peter confirmed that he had seen the stranger with his own eyes and how she had entered the house. The young man said that he noticed her and came to meet her, but the girl was so scared of him that she ran away before he. I asked her name. Afterwards, the companions continued to discuss the topic that one should have just been born like a prince because only he has an approach with the ladies here decided to leave here, and he thought to himself that he was hearing about Hardy more and more often. Meanwhile, the Viscountess turned to the Countess for help and began to assure her that Anna was more beautiful than all the girls she had worked with, and offered to see for herself by looking at her. Victoria promised to certainly help if all the words of the Viscountess turned out to be true, and warned that she did not like lies and wasted time because she herself was a famous lady to whom a whole cube riots who wanted to marry well lined up. The Viscountess was only worried about how untimely Aunt S' decision to go for a walk was when she had used every possible and impossible connection to bring this woman to their home. And the Countess herself was born in the family of an impoverished baronet and managed to rise to the title of Count, after which she very successfully married off her daughters. And now in secular society she was better known as the Queen. The Viscount has thought that if they could sell their newly born daughter to some rich man with a bag of money, then all their problems would be solved instantly. The woman recalled how her husband convinced her that his daughter was very beautiful and therefore could become their golden ticket. When Brenda didn't understand what her husband was talking about, he explained that they had gotten their hands on a great product to sell that they would be able to sell successfully in the bridal market. The husband did not understand his wife's objections, especially if you consider that if they sell her to a rich man with a lot of money, they will be able to pay off all their debts of live without any worries, and only after detailed explanations in the woman's head, everything fell into place and she supported the idea. Finally, the maid announced that Anna had returned and Brenda asked to invite the girl to the guest room, where the Countess appreciated our young flower at first glance. The Viscount has introduced our heroine to the Countess, and the girl greeted her with dignity. Bowing gracefully, Brenda immediately began asking the Countess about her first impression of meeting their little girl. The woman smiled and said that now she was able to verify the truth of the Viscountess's words about her stepdaughter. After that, the Countess named herself and informed our heroine that from now on she would be her pupil. After this meeting, the girl sat in her room and remembered the conversation with her grandmother, who told her to get out of her sight and her aunt, and did not try to explain that it was her fault and apologize. Yet the woman demanded that she immediately rejected the despicable offer. Our heroine tried her best to tell her grandmother that she couldn't do it because the Hardy family's lawyer met with Thomas Batten and he said that he agreed to a deal to sell this house, and now it would take a year for the house to pass to her father and then to her as an inheritance. The grandmother did not see any solution in the fact that her granddaughter is forced to sell herself for the sake of the house. Thus she told our heroine, although she tried to convince her otherwise, Orina saw this situation as an opportunity to keep the house to spend some time with her father, and so nothing wrong with it. Only the grandmother did not think so and asked her granddaughter if this was what she wanted and if she really considered such a turn of events to be good. The girl remembered her grandmother's upset requests to leave her because she wanted to be alone. Memories and thoughts of our heroine were interrupted by Lisa, who brought afternoon tea and offered to drink a delicious drink. Orna gladly agreed to have tea and even invited the maid to join her, which she gladly accepted. Lisa was drinking delicious tea and she was thinking about what a wonderful girl, her mistress even taking one Miss suggested to an ordinary maid to have tea together, and now she understood why everyone was gossiping about. The maid recalled hearing talk that Arnold was not at all like the other aristocrats because she lacked cold-bloodedness and arrogance, and despite the fact that she had the appearance of a provincial girl, she was still incredibly beautiful. And already Lisa might add that she is also incredibly kind, sweet and friendly. After some time, the maid noticed artificial flowers on the table and asked Anna if she had made them and asked permission to look. Our heroine confirmed that it was her handiwork, although she did not see anything special in this flower, and Lisa continued to admire the product. The maid said that her young lady is incredibly talented because the flower is not just beautiful. Looks like a real one, after which our heroine gave it to the girl. Lisa knew no bounds to her joy, and at the same time was afraid to accept such a gift, but Anta still convinced her, suggesting that it would look very nice on her hat or as a brooch, made promise to protect him, and immediately hurried to try it all, offering her mistress to go out for a walk, where she would act as a guide, and without waiting for an answer, she ran away to get a hat and an umbrella from the sun. Soon the girls were already walking through the green park, passed by the crowded port, visited the refreshing fountain, and the girls saw beauty in everything. When Lisa was showing our to the most famous hotel in the city, our heroine noticed two unusual passers-by. But at that moment, that maid pulled our heroine to look into a popular pastry shop. Only the gaze of our girl was fixed on one unknown passer-by whom she had already met before. But it was difficult to change Lisa's desire to visit the confectionery, even because her young lady fixed her gaze on her husband and was in no hurry to go with her. Our heroine asked to delay. But the girl justified her persistence by the fact that she understands her perfectly and agrees that the man is a very nice person. But one should not take reckless steps. When the maid managed to take our heroine away, she said that the man was absolutely not the right time for her and advised her not to even look in his direction. And when Anna asked if he was really that bad, the girl only confirmed that he was very bad and even worst of all, and to complete her argument she concluded that it is a real poisonous mushroom and asked the young mister to remember that eating such mushrooms leads to death. The plan of the Viscount and Viscountess was implemented little by little, and Countess Victoria took a direct part in choosing an incredibly chic dress for our heroine. Now Brenda was looking at this outfit and found it too revealing for a debut because it showed breasts and bare shoulders. The woman even offered to look at a more modest dress and preferably a normal one. To this, the Countess replied that she could fulfill her request only at the same time. There would be a spectacle considering that a girl who made her debut at the age of 20 would wear the same dress as a young debutante. It was difficult for the Viscountess to hear this remark, and even more so to admit the woman's rightness, considering that such an outfit would immediately attract the attention of those around her, and decided that if she and her husband sold something, then there would be enough money for it. Brenda decided to leave the situation in the hands of a woman. undo her business. So she decided to listen to the advice and called the maid who served Anna. The woman approached Lisa and told her to force her young lady to wear this dress by any means, and if she did not cope with the order, she would fly out of this house like a cork. The festive evening arrived and the ball was soon to begin, for which everyone was preparing, including Pierre. The housekeeper came to the prince's room and thanked him with relief that the servant would be able to avoid the queen's punishment, and reminded him that he must hurry so as not to be late for the ball. But being late for the festive evening seemed to the prince a very good idea, although Mrs. Fitz did not approve of Mr. A's wishes and simply hoped that there would be as little traffic jams as possible. But the Hardy family got into an accident on the way to the palace, and now, after a long delay, the Viscount and Viscountess blame each other for what had happened. Brenda blamed her husband for losing their mansion in the capital and noted that if it weren't for this trouble, they would have easily reached the palace. But the husband did not understand why to connect these two arrivals at all. In her turn was very worried and mentally even glad that there was a delay on the way because she did not want to go to any ball at all. She was most embarrassed by her appearance, but in order not to cause Lisa even more trouble, she had to wear this revealing outfit in which she wanted to immediately disappear somewhere out of sight of the carriage. Still arrived at the palace, and our beautiful heroine gracefully got out of it too. Scarcely had the Viscountess family got out of the vehicle, when the Countess exclaimed in confusion why they had arrived so late and would not listen to any explanation. Respectable one, considering their lateness to be a very unreasonable limit. Victoria was not joking, but when she also saw the shawl on the shoulders of our heroine, she began to find out how she ended up on our. To which the Viscountess said that otherwise they would not have come at all, because the girl refused to go without this accessory. The Countess grabbed our heroine by the hand and hastily dragged her behind her, voicing that this girl would not do what she pleased, and commented on the state of affairs with poverty. When Anna asked to wait, the woman nervously replied that she didn't have time to wait, and explained that this year's debut was over. Even the king had already arrived, so there was not enough time for any conversation. Victoria and Anna approached the door and the Countess asked the servants to announce their arrival, after which the door opened and a full hall of people appeared before our heroine's eyes, and the girl was invited to step forward. The Countess acted smartly and sharply pulled her shawl from harness shoulders, completely exposing the spectacular top of the dress. The idea of the Countess was very successful because at the same time as our heroine made her debut, the audience admired her beauty and found out whose daughter she was. The girl heard all the conversations of those present, and because of the excitement that accompanied her, she noticed that she was starting to suffocate. And then she also noticed that her handkerchief had disappeared somewhere or in a blush from discomfort, and felt an even greater lack of oxygen. And besides, she was shaking all over with excitement. Those present did not understand what was the reason for her such a sudden stop and began to whisper again, trying to find an explanation for the circumstances of what was happening. In our circumstances of what was happening in our confused heroine was in the midst of all this cold-blooded crowd of aristocrats and desperately did not understand how to get out of this situation because it was all unbearable for her. At that moment it was announced that the prince had arrived, who confidently walked down the hall and was already approaching our heroine. He was frozen with embarrassment and excitement. Brenda convulsively called Anna Fall, who had just stood in the prince's path and saw absolutely no way out of a dire situation, while the countess watched with interest and the prince walked forward and wondered in his mind who this girl was, who not only did not move aside, but also for some reason continued to stand in one place. But our heroine was already shaken, and as a result she slowly fainted, falling right into the arms of the handsome prince. And then the girl buried in the young man's chest began to cry and continue to tremble, and the prince felt how the stranger was suffocating and began to ask her to breathe slowly. At some point Anna looked up and saw a young man standing right next to her in the closest acidity. And besides, they met their eyes. And already after that the prince again leaned towards her and asked our heroine to slowly breathe in and out. Everyone present watched with interest what was happening, and our heroine did not leave the caring prince, who helped her to recover and calm down. And when the girl gradually came to her senses, she began to apologize for her rudeness. The young man looked at the beautiful stranger and said nothing, thinking only that she must be very frightened, because that was the only way he could explain her condition. The prince looked again at our blushing heroine, and he had one incongruity as to why, with all this, she was wearing such a revealing dress, and at that moment he heard the words of apology that came from the side. Countess Victoria approached Pierre and again sincerely apologized for Miss Hardy's behavior, explaining that the young lady was nervous and because of that made a mistake. But now the prince finally clarified for himself where the wind was blowing. It was now definitely clear that this young person who had just been in his hands, had somehow ended up in the hands of the most important matchmaker in the entire kingdom. After this event, those present began to discuss the countess and her best traditions of using a majestic man in order to put the girl in the best light, and did not understand how it was possible to plan everything like this, much less to learn that the prince would appear at the time she needed. And yet they could not explain this coincidence in any other way than the woman's well-thought-out plan. The countess meanwhile returned to our heroine and invited her to go and dance, arguing that she was a debutante, while emphasizing that of course, if she was better. Arnhem, with tears in her eyes, told the woman that she would not do this, to which Victoria replied that our heroine still has the same character, although you can't tell from the outside. The woman approached the girl and acknowledged her decision not to dance, but ordered her to preserve even a drop of her dignity, stressing that this was the only opportunity not to tarnish the honor of the Bad and family. The Countess Arctic consoled herself with the fact that no matter what, she remains a lady from the Batten family, and therefore must endure all the vicissitudes of this evening with dignity. When our heroine regained her composure and calmed down a little, she saw two famous twin princes standing by the wall. The same Pierre and Lena, and the girl immediately concluded that although they looked like two drops of water, but the aura from them is completely different. She saw that the first crown prince had a rather tough look, and his entire appearance resembled a military one, while the second one she encountered was relaxed, as if this ball was a normal outing for him. Now our heroine could say for sure that the man who was at the station and whom she saw near the hotel is one and the same person, namely Princess Pierre. And of course the same poisonous mushrooms. Anna studied the airs. They noticed their glances in her direction. While leaving it, Min inquired of his brother if it was true that there was nothing between them, to which Pierre stated that no one knew then had, that is, His Highness wills, so shall it be. Pierre suggested to his brother to invite this girl to the dance, referring to the fact that no one would refuse the crown prince, to which Lennon immediately asked why he should do this, and heard the answer that it was because he liked her. The brothers began to discuss the points of who is interested in one and agreed that it was time to end this conversation, after which Lenit went about his business, and Pierre remained to look at the beautiful object of general attention. The prince reflected that if he hadn't known that this girl was from the Hardy family, as well as being confused with the countess, he might well have been caught remembering the trembling that went through her whole body and the cold sweat that had been revealed. So he now concluded that she had played the role perfectly, especially after the daring outfit had attracted attention. So now was the time to pretend to be a sweet and naive lady. He decided to go, and he made another conclusion for himself. That he did not know what kind of fool would go to this performance. But he was definitely sure that he would suffer greatly, although it was no longer his business, and in the garden gazebo. Meanwhile, the king and queen were having tea, and the husband decidedly thought about the fact that his son should be married urgently and asked his wife's opinion on this matter. The woman replied that it seemed to her that he still did not know his son Pierre. Since she thought that he would obediently listen to his words, and she supplemented her answer by saying that she had once asked him if in the meantime whether there was a girl who would worry his heart. And the king heard his son's answer to this, which sounded the question whether his divorce alone was not enough for them, and the woman added that her son's words gave her goosebumps. The man thought for a while, and then admitted that he perfectly remembers what he had to give up. And when he finally came to meaning the abdication of the throne and the desire for a divorce, the king still remembered the words of his son, who had assured him of his firmness and final decision. And yet he continued to seek a way out of this situation, expressing the hope of somehow inducing him to a new marriage. The queen remarked that the problem was precisely that their son did not want it at all, to which her husband said that he must be made to want, and asked if it was certain between him and the young person he had encountered in hall there is nothing. Then the woman said that Laneit was personally interested in this matter directly from his brother, and was sure that nothing connected them, and the queen asked the man if he really liked the Viscountess' daughter. To this, the king replied that it didn't matter to him whose daughter she would be. The main thing was that she could melt his son's heart and emphasize that his only condition for the future daughter-in-law was that the girl be better than Gladys. The queen understood the man's concern and asked him not to worry, as she was sure that Pierre would never be reunited with his ex-wife when the prince was at home. The housekeeper came in and reported that he had guests, but the young man knew for sure who was visiting him. He asked the woman to bring him a drink and noted that the drink should be stronger, and he himself went to the guest room where his ex-wife was already waiting for him. Pierre looked at Gladys and greeted his ex-wife with a smile, who looked him straight in the eye carefully in someone studying, but Prince entered the study with dignity and sat down in a chair, after which he listened indifferently to the address of Gladys, who spoke about how long it had been since their last meeting and then how sorry she was that she had come to visit him without warning. The girl nervously continued to say that she decided to meet and talk in such an environment than if they met somewhere outside. Gladys broke down in tears and began apologizing for what had happened between them. Admitting solely her fault for what had happened, finally the prince spoke that as far as he could remember, they had already clarified their relationship long ago, where she gave what she wanted and got what she needed, and even asked for confirmation of his words. The princess was silent and just cried. Then the young man emphasized that she was still as beautiful and still as annoying as before. Pierre looked at his ex-wife for a while and finally asked to move closer to the case because he thought that she definitely did not come here to apologize. He directly asked who ordered her to do this and even suggested that the initiative to reunite with her ex-husband came from the king, especially when all the problems were behind her. So now, the princess, a good and obedient daughter, known for her kind heart, came to carry out the order. But the girl declared that she was not here for that, but because she wanted to apologize and only now had the courage because all this time the pity of a tear. But the prince rudely interrupted her and informed her that it seems to him she did not fully understand everything. Pierre clarified that the deal was absolutely fair and added that his side was still in the winning position, but now the girl interrupted his speech. The prince laughed at the fact that his ex-wife cared for him so much and found it very touching, so touching that I wanted to cry. Pierre dropped a cup of tea on the floor, and when a servant ran into the room, he asked to clean up and left the room, himself leaving Gladys alone. 3 days had passed since the ball, and the maid was always worried about the condition of her young lady, who, having fallen ill, had spent all these days in bed. But now our heroine replied that everything was fine and she was much better. Lisa was convinced that Anna should not worry so much about this unsuitable prince, and no matter how much she persuaded the girl, everything was useless. The maid then decided to make a gift for her mistress and brought her a whole pile of various newspapers and tabloid magazines so that she, after reading, could learn absolutely everything about the upper world. Lisa said that our heroine will be able to find any information of interest to her here, but the girl immediately saw how society constantly scolds this poisonous prince, whose photos they even immediately cut out. The maid left her young lady in the company of the press, and she herself went to sort out all the bookcase and letters that had accumulated during her illness. Was immediately interested in information about Pure and came across the fact that he divorced Princess Gladius, and after the breakup of the relationship never visited his child who died due to illness. So never once looked at his own father, who in addition ignored his son's funeral. The girl also learned that even in the circle of close people he is called heartless, and that as a result of the scandal he gave up the right to inherit the throne which was expected from the poisonous mushroom of the royal family. And our heroine concluded that he's still that scoundrel, and the prince, meanwhile, spent time with his friends who discussed the fact that the most suitable candidate for the hand and heart of Hardy's daughter is Count Learman. And Pierre was even surprised that this old man was still alive. The prince listened to the conversation of his companions and thought about the fact that wherever he went, he was haunted by this name, and he also did not like the excessive uproar in which the successful marriage of a famous daughter to a rich groom continued. Spider generally began to feel sorry for our heroine, deciding that she, having never properly met a normal man in her entire life, would immediately become the bride of the grandfather. And another young man for some reason noticed her resemblance to Princess Gladys. The prince concluded that his friends were fools, and the companions continued to express their remarks that although they looked different, the atmosphere around them was very similar, and to be honest they were both as beautiful as roe deer. But Pierre had his own opinion about this, where he believed that if these little animals cling to a man, they immediately sing in a different way, which he shared with his friends, and one of them offered to do one good deed before our unfortunate heroine was forced to marry. And this good deed was to give her the opportunity to enjoy the true courtship of young people. The prince decided that it would be a good memory for his friends and offered a bet where the one who would win the young lady's choice would win. Our heroine sat and admired the delicate lilies of the valley, which she considered the most beautiful plant, and having made a whole bunch of artificial flowers now, she did not know what to do with them. So she decided to sell them as she did in her city. When the girl was thinking about how best to arrange everything, a maid knocked on the room and brought a large box with the gift. Lisa said that a new dress was delivered to her in which she should go to the opening of the exhibition. Today the maid took the outfit out of the package while explaining that this event is very famous and is held at the Royal Academy of Arts every summer. And also noted that this time her dress was quite modest. Our heroine immediately remembered that this is the same educational institution where her childhood friend Payable studies, and assumed that maybe they could meet there soon. Anna was looking around the academy, and despite the fact that today was also very crowded, he still felt a lot calmer, assuming that it was due to a possible. With a friend, the Countess expressed hope that today would pass successfully and emphasized that it is possible if she does not have a dubious passion for feeling shame, in which the girl promised to make every effort. The woman got angry and considered our heroine absolutely hopeless and warned that any mistakes she made was a stain on her reputation. and then ask how long Arna was going to pretend to be a poor village girl, and ordered her to recover immediately and follow her instructions. It was difficult for the girl only because the eyes of the surrounding people were again fixed on her, and because of this her breath caught again. Our heroine escaped to the garden, caught herself thinking that she did not want to return to society at all, although she also understood that she should not give up in the face of difficulties. At one point she saw a young man with red hair and a strong figure and assumed that it could be payable. Alda rushed to find her friend and tried to catch up with the stranger to make sure it wasn't him. And at the same time she ran past the prince who had settled down on a garden bench to take a nap. He recognized the girl running through the garden as the same stranger he had met at the ball or heroine. Having missed the potential, Pavlo sat down on the bench displeased and decided to rest, not knowing that she had already disturbed the precious dream of the prince who followed the cat's tail. When the girl came to her senses she raised her head and saw Office at the bench on which lay the prince she already knew. When their eyes met the girl blushed to the tips of her hair and ran away, only having time to apologize hastily. So the young man decided that she was planning a secret rendezvous with some guy named Payable. But Prince came to the conclusion that there were quite a few willing to encroach on this font and noticed that it was still a very old-fashioned trick. The girl returned to the academy and now scolded herself from misbehaving again in front of the prince. At one point people began to whisper because they noticed that Princess Gladys had also come and look. Simply incredible. Meanwhile, the girl went to greet the king and queen while people continued to discuss her and her ex-husband. The same poisonous mushroom or heroine listened to the conversations of those present and she herself had many questions for the prince where she did not understand how it was possible to leave such a beautiful wife. At that moment, Pierre also came to the hall. And people concluded that he had no manners at all, although we will only know more in part 2, so stay tuned. In the meantime, check out one of my other videos, Romance Revenge. Family Betrayal. It's all there, all on Manhwa by Miss Mysterious. Have a good day and come back soon for part 2. Comment down below which other manhwa recaps you want to see.